Hello everyone, I have this like tiny coffee table that I do these videos at and this old creaky chair. So welcome back. If you have been here before, you know the drill. This is a 5-minute Bible study of today, Acts chapter 12. This handout that you're about to see up on the screen, get it for free, download it on our website, 2BeLikeChrist.com. There's a link in the description. Acts 12, let's talk about it. When did the events of Acts 12 take place? Well, we have a little bit more precision on these dates than we do on some of the other chapters. This is probably happening in 44 AD. One of the things that tells us that it might have been around 44 was because we're going to be introduced to a guy named Herod, who was the king of Judea from 41 to 44 AD. And that leads us into our characters. I guess we can talk about Herod Agrippa first, even though it's out of order here. But Herod Agrippa I was the king of Judea. He was the grandson of Herod the Great, the guy who tried to kill Jesus. And he died at the age of 54, which we'll talk about at the end of the chapter. Then we've got James. He was the brother of John the Apostle, and James was an apostle himself. We haven't talked about him a whole lot in Acts so far. We've got Peter, who we have talked about a whole lot. He was an apostle. His brother was Andrew. And this is going to be really the last chapter where we see Peter's work highlighted in a major way. The focus of Acts is going to shift more towards Paul's ministry after this. And then we've got Rhoda. She was a servant girl who worked in the house of Mary. Mary was the mother of John, called Mark. And then our final character is John Mark. He was a traveling companion of Paul and Barnabas, and we're introduced to him here for the first time in chapter 12. Where do the events of chapter 12 take place? Well, we start off in the city of Jerusalem, and then we will talk about the city of Caesarea, which was the city northwest of Jerusalem up on the Mediterranean coast. And now for our outline of this chapter. There's a lot of things going on here, a lot of major events. The first section, verses 1 through 5, is the martyrdom of James the Apostle and the imprisonment of Peter. Herod Agrippa I was a persecutor of the early church, and he arrested James the Apostle and he had him killed with the sword. When Herod figured out that this really pleased his Jewish constituents, he arrested Peter and he intended to kill him as well. And that leads us into our second section, verses 6 through 19. Peter is going to be rescued from prison. So the night before Peter was supposed to be killed, he was chained between two prison guards and he was asleep. An angel of the Lord appeared and loosed his chains and led him out of the prison through the iron gate to the street of the city. After arriving outside, the angel departed. Peter, realizing that he was now free, he goes to Mary's house. Mary was a disciple, and there were several other disciples at her house praying about this situation with Peter. Peter goes and he knocks on the door and he asks to be let in, and a servant girl named Rhoda answers the door, but she doesn't open it. She just hears Peter's voice and she recognizes that it's Peter, and she doesn't open the door. She runs back in and starts telling the prayer group that Peter has been released, but they don't believe her. Now, when they went back to the door and they finally let Peter in, they were all amazed to see him standing in front of them. And Peter recounted his experience with the angel and being released from prison, but then he very quickly left and he went into hiding. Herod searched for Peter the next day, but he couldn't find them, and in his anger he had the prison guards killed, probably to make it look like they had conspired to let Peter out of jail. And then finally, the third section, Herod is going to die. So this describes the way that he died in verses 20 through 25. One day, Herod was dressed in his royal robes, and he was sitting on his throne, and he gave an oration to the people in the city of Caesarea. And the people looked at him, and they worshipped him as if he were a god. They even said, quote, "the voice of a god and not a man." And Herod was all about this, and he accepted their praise, and his heart was full of pride. And because of that, the Lord sent an angel, and the angel, quote, struck Herod down, and he was eaten by worms and breathed his last. You can read some about Herod's death in secular history, along with the information that we have here. And for our application, I just have one today. How does an angel free a prisoner who's chained to two guards and then lead them out of an iron-gated prison without the slightest resistance? How did the men who Peter was chained to not realize that he wasn't there anymore? How did they not recognize that the gate was opening and people were walking out of it? The lesson for us is that God can work in ways that are invisible and undiscernible to us. And He can affect change in the world around us without our recognition, even things that are right in front of our eyes. So don't assume that just because you can't see God working, that He isn't working. Don't think too much of yourself by presuming that you understand every way that God works.